we were both heavily manipulated, but the manipulation on my side was to achieve.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie2988 coming at you live once again to the power of the internet, and you're listening to Power of the Internet. If you're unfamiliar with the series, it's my interview series. I haven't done one in like a year, but you'll find a list down below. Today, I am interviewing my brother. This is Dr. Brian Lee Williams, and we're coming off of the LolCal Live episode. If you haven't seen that, I'll link that down below as well. Brian, you did exceedingly well on that episode. Are you aware of that?
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, you should be doing more internet shit other than just like tweeting every once in a while.
I don't know. I've never felt like I was good on media, but this is kind of a different environment, and I enjoyed it. Plus, this stuff that I was interested in. So,
well, this is coming from a man who's been keynote speaker to a bunch of ridiculous stuff at this point, right? Like, you've done speeches, you've done presentations, you've spoken for a living. A lot of people don't know this, especially if you're coming into this cold. But my brother is an accredited doctorate of epidemiology, and he's worked. Do what?
In public health, yeah,
in public health. This man has worked with the CDC. This man has worked with all these different he's taught for he taught like for a total of 15 years, 20 years.
Weren't you almost 30? Almost 30.
Yeah, weren't you a dean at one point?
Yeah, I was an associate dean of research.
Yeah, I can't believe that, man. So for every bit of laziness and lay around the house and not do stuff, Brian got out there and worked. And so I always think of like Brian as the example of somebody who really rose to the challenge. I was someone who just kind of like got damaged and was like, man, I'm not going to do it. And then our sister landed somewhere, I think, elsewhere. I don't really like what a shit talk our sister or anything like that. God bless Carla. If you ever see this stuff, I appreciate everything you've ever done. That said, we have some questions from fans today, from people who wanted to follow up on your interview with Tommy C and Jordy. And I wanted to get a little bit more into our abusive childhood past. Of course, we went into the details during the interview, but I've always wondered, as accomplished as you are, how much of it was you letting that damage hold you down like I did, or how much of it was like you putting it to work to make you want to be better? Like, in your mind, how did that stuff affect you?
I don't know if I actually put it to work. I actually think it was just a function of survival. I don't think I had much of a choice. It's either sink or swim. As I mentioned on our podcast, I think my childhood, while abusive, was very different than yours.
Yeah,
very abusive, but there are things that, we were both heavily manipulated, but the manipulation on my side was to achieve.
Yeah.
And so everything, whereas the manipulation on your side was to be dependent on her.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was two very different influences.
I think another thing that we don't really get into too much is I did not really have a masculine influence. Of course, Dad was very sick by the time I was a teenager. He had the alcohol-induced stroke, or whatever what do you call that? What exactly happened to him? I've never really understood what exactly happened.
He largely had encephalitis, late-stage alcohols, encephalitis due from vitamin deprivation, a number of other things, I think.
What caused the stroke-like effect? Like, what specifically?
Well, the brain just actually starts to swell, and so everything gets short-circuited. I forget the actual clinical terminology, but it happens quite frequently, and people who were late stages of alcoholism. He never had liver issues. I know he had some kidney issues, but he was a candidate, I guess, probably for organ failure, but this got him first. And so I never got the full story. And I don't think I actually even read the medical reports. I read the ones, where he got lung cancer and died, but not, this one. So
Yeah.
I never
Yeah.
got the full story, and I never wanted to invest myself much into it because it was just too damn depressing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I was a sophomore in college or junior in college, and so it is just everything went to hell after that, especially. So
Yeah.
what
I
little
mean,
support I got from home
yeah.
left,
Yeah, I
and
can't
so
imagine how what you're sophomore year of college and you just literally just got dropped into nothing. Because I can tell you back home, mom was attempting to buy a house with dad, but their marriage was on the rocks. They were fighting all the time. She was
mhm,
dating another man openly. She was dating that Johnny guy, and like
yeah,
dad knew about it, so he was drinking harder than he's ever drank.
mhm,
And then the money dried up, and mom was never good with money. Right? Am I
right.
mistaken about that? That's what I remember for sure.
Oh, she was absolutely horrible.
You remember she rented a television? She would always rent to own like TVs and stuff, but also like in later in life, couches and stuff. I remember, I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
the only way. Her credit was so bad. She never paid anybody back. She made Donald Trump look like um, a good. She never paid anybody back, even when she had the money.
Yeah.
And
I do
and
remember I do remember distinctly several repo men showing up at our front doors, you know.
well, for the longest time, we had the company stores, which you don't remember, but in the 70s, especially company stores kind of operated like those predatory lending. They would get you so far in debt and the whole, dad would come home and his paycheck would be virtually nothing.
Yeah, for a lot of you
But
guys don't know, we're the sons of coal miners. Daddy Carl was a coal
mhm,
miner. That's my mom's dad. My dad was a coal miner. And so when we talk about the company store, we're talking about the mining store. The
right.
people that paid you would own a corporation, and then they would take what you owed directly out of your check. And of course, the prices in their store was so much more expensive than a Walmart, but they were mining in the hills of Kentucky. So there ain't no Walmart. You want something, you probably got to go to the company store, right?
Yeah, it was the only place to get a lot of stuff, and especially things like gas. When we had a gas shortage in the 70s, it was one of the few places you could get it. And I mean, the markup was really, really high, I'm sure. But she did that, but she always blamed it on dad's drinking. But a Pabst Blue Ribbon 6-pack only cost so much money.
Yeah, he
He
drank what was the least trendy beer at the time. I know like PBR was trendy for a while. But at the
Not
time
back
that was
then, it wasn't.
yeah, it was the rot gut, right? Like that
Yeah,
was the cheap beer. And if the man drank anything harder than beer, I remember it being Wild Turkey or Fireball, which is also like the dirt cheapest stuff. And then of course, like
yeah,
occasionally he would come home with some moonshine. I remember seeing it in
yeah.
jars.
He really didn't drink liquor until later in his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how a lot of folks back then differentiate between being an alcoholic or not. You weren't an alcoholic if you drink beer, but
Yeah.
you're an alcoholic if you drink liquor.
Except for the last year or so of his life, like once mom was openly cheating and stuff, the liquor was still for special occasions, like very, very special occasions. He would get like a jar of moonshine, and that would be under the couch where he slept. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think people probably don't know about that. We should talk about that. But it would be there for a year. It would take forever for him to actually go through it.
Mm,
But yeah, I even in that house that mom was attempting to buy, dad slept on the couch.
yeah.
I have no idea why it was like that. Why was it like that?
Well, I tell you what, it was two things. One of which, she always kept us in her room, originally,
Oh yeah, I slept in my
especially
mom's
me.
bed till I was 12, which
Yeah.
is not great.
Uh,
And then I moved into a bed in the room, which made it very difficult to be a 13-year-old, if you know what I mean. You know what we
Yeah.
do, you know.
And I'm sure that was, and because I remember dad being upset about it. I mean, it was, um, but she did that as a form of control and things like that too. So, um, he eventually, and the other thing is because he did work odd hours, a lot of times he would sleep through the day and go to work at night.
Right,
So
which is
then he would sleep in his bed. But it depended on what shift. But he was basically ostracized. I mean, he was completely emasculated. Um, and I never understood why he allowed that. But
you know, I've done a lot of soul searching on that. And you and I are very different. I am I don't know, you see it in other members of her family too. I think your boys to some degree. Your oldest Cole, he's a little bit tougher, a little bit stronger, a little bit more forward. Your youngest is a little bit more sensitive, like me. So I've always been like the sensitive introvert. You've always been the more like aggressive extrovert. I just take it, man. Like you watched my boxing match. I just stood there and took it. Right. Whereas you would stand up for yourself. I think I have a lot in common with Dad in that regard, because like you said during our original interview, Dad was a product of his Christian upbringing. He was a product of being raised in the hills of Kentucky. You married for good. You're just good. That's what you die doing that. Whoever you married, you die with that person.
Right.
And so I think maybe that was it. But yeah,
I don't know. It's very confusing because he was actually he boxed in the Marine Corps, was very good.
Oh God, I wish I'd known that going into my fight, because I would have tried to do better. But go ahead.
I remember him teaching me how to box and stuff. But he was actually, and really athletically was very solid. I remember even as a kid seeing him play basketball, playing softball. I know it's hard. It's funny because he played with a hernia that he wouldn't get operated on for years. He finally got it operated on. But I remember seeing how good he was. And he was, a skilled athlete, but I don't know what it was. Something broke him. And I don't think it was mom. I think it was something, deep inside. But I think for me, that's one of the biggest regrets that I ever have. And I've written about it. I never knew him at all.
Yeah.
Nothing about him, nothing about what really made him tick. I can remember just a few, but what I knew about him, or what you knew about him for the most part, was always filtered through her.
Yep.
Or what she would say about him.
Yep.
And that's, that I can't, we can't trust anything.
No, that woman lied. You knew if her mouth was open, she was probably lying.
And there could have been, truths in what she said about him being abusive and things like that. I don't necessarily think that wasn't true, but by the same token, I only know what I saw of him, and I never saw the man violent.
No.
He would act like he's going to be mad and stuff, but I remember getting in altercations with him when I was a teenager, and I'd shove him or whatever, and he would never come back. He would never hit me, never hurt me, and I'm sure he could have.
Oh, sure.
So I don't know. It's very confusing. I understand how people feel that have been abandoned by their father, because we're abandoned in a lot of ways, even though he was there.
Yeah. He was physically there, but most of the time he was deep inside a beer can, right?
Right. But and like I said, he was never bad during that time.
No, he never was.
He was always a happy drunk, and
and he was he was extremely gentle with animals. He loved every animal we ever had. I remember after he had his stroke, I call it, I don't know exactly what to call it, but I call it the stroke. He was deaf from the mines. He couldn't talk very well. He had the stutter, and then he'd give up, and I feel like if they had rehabilitated him more, he might have gotten there. I don't know if it was a health insurance thing. I don't know if it was mom's call, but he did not get very far into rehabilitation, and they just gave up eventually. Like they stopped doing anything. So I remember he was obsessed with America's Funniest Home Videos, because it had cute animals in it. And even though he couldn't really hear the television or follow a television show very well anymore, he would sit and watch that constantly. So I started taping them. And then when I would go to school, I'd put in like a 6-hour tape of those and just put them on the TV. Sometimes he'd watch them, sometimes he wouldn't. But you were going to say? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, he loved Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom, which is an old show that used to be on Sundays.
I remember that. Yeah.
It was like it was kind of the precursor to like Steve Irwin's Crocodile Hunter and stuff.
Yeah. I remember him fighting with mom to watch Hee Haw and Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom. And at one point, I remember him having an argument with her, and she's like, "No, we're watching this, Carl." And he's like, "Wanda Faye, I work 40 hours a week in a goddamn mine. Let me watch Hee Haw for 1 fucking hour."
Yeah, I
and,
remember
and
those
we'll-
arguments.
yeah, and we talk about him being passive. I remember one night she wanted to go out to see Johnny, and Dad was absolutely against it. And then he was against me going because it was like 8 o'clock at night, and he knew that I was going to be out all night. And so she ended up like splitting. You remember he had like a cyst above his eye?
Yeah.
She split that cyst with a shoe, and he didn't like fight back or anything. He just went and took care of it. It's like it's so, I don't know, it's so bizarre. The man that I knew, and to hear that he was a boxer, to know that he was a Marine, to know that in his words, he spent his entire time in the Marine Corps drinking and getting pussy. It doesn't seem
Well,
like the man I
and he
knew.
used to
You
tell
know?
me, he used to tell me too, especially when he would drink and then start talking about his Marine Corps days, he would talk about being aboard ship, and he would have to throw fights, purposely lose fights to some countries that they'd be in because they didn't want to upset the guest host.
Oh, that's so
And
funny.
he would talk about for diplomatic relations. I remember him saying that over and over again.
He said
And
the only reason I lost a fight is because they made me do it.
so I'm sure he took a beating, but some of those pictures, and I'll have to find some of them I've scanned, I think, but physically he looked a lot like me. He was about almost 5'10", 5'11". He had a good body. He wasn't that emaciated person that we always knew.
Right, yeah. Because I
He
think
was
when he died, it was only like 99 pounds. Of course, he
if
was dying
that,
of
yeah.
cancer, but yeah,
Yeah,
he
but
was.
he was so emaciated, and his and I know that often happens to alcoholics when they have the encephalitis, but anyhow, he physically was, and cousin Kenny, who just passed away, and a couple other who knew him, I remember them talking about him, saying, God, he was so much fun to be around. He was, and I never knew him. I never knew
Yeah,
that part of
yeah.
him.
Eh,
And I'm sure he never acted that way, around mom.
No, I can't imagine. I mean, you said earlier that you felt like it wasn't Wanda Williams that broke him. I think through 35 years of systematic abuse, 40 years, I forget exactly how long they were married, but I think that woman was very, very good at what she did. She was very good at, like, teaching Head Start and then coming home, like teaching 30 people's other kids and taking care
Right.
of them and feeding them and then coming home and neglecting us, or
Right.
worse, right? Neglect is a good day.
Right.
And so I don't know. Sometimes I think she just ended that man, and maybe he was abusive at the beginning. But boy, did he pay for it if he was.
I think it's also, if it's kind of a classic alcoholic situation or dynamic, in that she enabled him in a lot of ways too. So he knew that if she wasn't around, he couldn't get by with a lot of stuff he did.
Yeah.
And so she fed him. She did, she kept things. She did things that he didn't know how to do.
Yeah.
And I think he was scared of losing that, because he didn't, I'm sure there's many things he would. I mean, the time that she would abandon us and like just leave for days.
Yeah.
He didn't know how to do. He didn't know how to cook. He
No.
didn't know how to do, just basic stuff, to take care of us. And
Yep.
so
Yep.
I think that was, that happens a lot, and with alcoholics.
Yeah. I
They'll stay
often
with somebody just because they can help them live.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because then he seemed to be pretty good at the mines. I mean, it was only towards the end that we started getting phone calls about him not showing up to work, but he seemed to work hard in the mines. He knew what he was doing there and did a good job of it,
Oh yeah, at one point they wanted him to be a superintendent.
Yeah.
And he did some stupid stuff he got busted for, but he could not handle the pressure of being a boss. They made him a boss, and that was a big transition if you went from being a miner to a foreman, and because then you were a company person, and it meant a lot more money, relatively speaking. And he started, his ulcers started. It just drove him insane.
Yeah.
And
I couldn't imagine.
And he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't deal with the pressure.
So we were talking about other masculine role models. I feel like we didn't talk very much about Daddy Carl on the last episode. And I think that is Oh my God. So I might edit that out. And if I don't, enjoy the free burp, people listening. But that said, we didn't talk a lot about our grandfather, which is Daddy Carl, my mom's dad. Now,
Mhm.
my memory of Daddy Carl is cold stone, badass MF, coal miner, kill you so much as look at you. And the reason my memory of him is because he threatened to kill me more times than he told me he loved me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious as to am I mistaken? He was a pretty masculine person, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was all about that bravado, especially during, I mean, he grew up in basically Logan County, West Virginia, which was the wild. I mean,
Mhm.
it's where the coal mining wars. His dad was a sheriff. I mean, that was just everything he was about.
So he took you kind of under his wing, didn't he?
He did, and and I have a lot of difficulty with that one, because in a lot of ways he saved me.
Yeah.
I got a feeling he did. In some ways, he was a lot like Mom in that he did it as much for him as he did it for me as a grandson.
Yeah.
He had done my older. We have an older cousin, the one I told you just passed away. Kenny, he's about 70 something now when he passed, but Kenny was the firstborn son of Mom's sister, and he kind of did the same thing with him because he had a child, a boy that was stillborn, named Carl Jr.
Oh
And
man.
so it was devastating to him when that boy died, and so he kind of used, I mean, or adopted us in a way. But I don't know. There's, because she accused him of abuse and things like that. I don't know how much of that was true.
Yeah.
Um,
Same. Yeah.
Who knows?
It's my understanding. This is my memory. Again, my memory is very, very bad about a lot of this stuff, as we've talked about many times.
Mhm.
There's things that I just completely omitted that you had to remind me of, for example. But my memory of it is that Daddy Carl and Mima drank, and when they drank, they were very different people. But then eventually they gave it up and they became nowhere near like as. But that's Mom's version of it. But she's like, you don't know them. You don't know them because you don't know them when they drank. They were monsters when they drank. But I who knows?
Oh, I believe that. I mean, I believe they were. I think she was kind of worse than he was. Um, I
Oh,
think
Memo? You mean
Memo.
our grandmother? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I never saw Daddy Carl act like Mom. I saw Memo act like Mom a lot. Um, I talked to Aunt Bobby some, but nobody. You never know the whole story. I mean, Daddy Carl was a brawler. I know that, and he just
Mhm.
loved any excuse to fight.
Yep.
But he was also a womanizer, and she supposedly slept around too. But I think they were both very bad when they drank. And he drank up to the point he retired, until he's like 65,
That's
and
interesting. Yeah.
he stopped. Just boom, didn't smoke anymore, didn't drink. Boom, and he made her do the same thing. Um, and she would sneak and she would try to smoke behind his back and stuff. But I only remember one time of him getting alcohol, and it was up on Jenkins Mountain and some fight over something. I don't know if he was fighting Mama and I just remember it was one of the few times I ever heard him cuss because he didn't curse either.
Yep.
And he said, "God damn it, Alta!" And I remember him stopping at some little store and getting like a 32-ounce Budweiser. And I remember seeing it in the refrigerator because we'd never seen beer in the refrigerator. It was so
Yeah.
taboo
Yeah.
over there. Hell, he didn't even drink sugar colas. He drank, he
Diet 7-Up was the drink that I remember.
or
Yeah.
Fresca
Yeah. And the man, I'll never forget, Mom would drop me off there every once in a while and try to force some bonding time. And we'd make it work. He would go to Jay's and get a bottle of Fresca or a bottle of Diet Sprite and then a half gallon of ice cream. He'd split that half gallon ice cream down the middle with a knife, a carton and all, and then hand me one half and him the other half, and we'd eat it out of the carton while watching television. So that man ate more sugar than God and wouldn't drink diet sodas. As weird as that was, but He loved his ice cream in my memory. But then again, I was the fat little piggy of the family, so he might have been just trying to bond.
Well, no, I did the same thing. I did the same thing with him. But but yeah, I mean, overall, he was a very positive influence on me.
Yeah.
The things that hurt the most is when mom would lie to him and he would believe her.
Oh yeah, yep.
And like you said, he threatened to kill you. He would say the same things to me, and especially he would say, "You think you're too good for us now that you went to school," and I never ever thought that.
No,
But
never did.
but he
I will correct. I think you thought you were above the abuse, which I want you to be. I want you to be above the narcissistic, horrific abuse that we were going through. You thought you were separated from that and didn't want to be back involved, but you never thought you were better than anybody. You just thought you survived that and didn't want to dip back into it. That was my opinion of you.
Yeah, I mean, but it bothered me because that was all I was about, and I knew that but I wanted him to believe, because he was, we didn't have a dad to protect us from her. You thought somebody would say something to her, but she would do the exact same thing to, with dad. She'd get in a fight and swear that dad did that, and I was there, and it didn't happen.
No. Did Daddy Carl know, did he know the extent of it? Did he know about the stabbings and the burnings and the beatings and the hammers and getting your nose broken and all this? Did he know the extent of it?
I mean, I'm sure that I told him and I said stuff, but I don't think he ever believed it. Or, well, now let me say that it's not that he ever believed. I think it was just denial. It was the loyalty above all else to your kids and protect your kids.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I understand that. I mean, again, he grew up in the land of the Hatfields and McCoys. I mean,
right. Yeah.
It was a blood feud. Everything was a damn blood feud. And so that was just his mentality. And I don't think he ever wanted to accept, nor could he accept, something like that, that his daughter did. But I mean, it was just always disappointing to me because like I said, he was my only protector in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. And there's only so much they could do. And I think a part of it is obviously loyalty too, but even when you're that close to it, or maybe especially because you're that close to it, it is unbelievable. I know that a lot of the people that are listening here are listening to this because they're hoping you'll invalidate the things I said instead of validate it, because they don't believe me. They cannot believe it. And I don't blame them because it is unbelievable. I have trouble believing it. I genuinely do. I look back at it and I think, how could that have happened?
I struggle with that a lot because, especially with my ex-wife, and her and I were just talking about this week. I think I've said this a million times. You may know what things like war are about, but unless you're in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Ukraine, you really don't understand what they went through. You might be able to the best that you can possibly do is to be empathetic. And a lot of people choose not to be empathetic. You're out of focus too, by the way, Boogie. I don't know.
Oh, that'll be all right.
But a lot of people choose, and my ex-wife will say things like, and this was a big problem when we were with the kids. She would say, "Well, you made that choice to do this." Well, yeah, and sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, and those choices were clouded by a messed up mentality or a psyche, and I was aware of it, but it was never with harm intended. I wasn't trying to do something to hurt her, hurt my kids, or doing something.
No, of course not.
I advocate responsibility for it, but people can't relate to an environment that is so foreign to them. And I liken it to I got a little pit bull when it was 6 months old, and that pit bull, when I got it, the one Tata, you've seen it, and that pit bull, what they do is they they try to fight them when they're young. If they're not aggressive, they'll try to sell them or breed them if they're pretty. And when I got her, she had marks all over where she'd been chewed up and stuff. That dog would not get out of the truck when I got her. She was so scared. Now, this is a powerful, muscular, athletic dog. But that dog had been so traumatized, it changes. And we know it changes your brain. It affects your frontal lobe. It affects how your lack of emotional regulation. It affects so many different things about you. And I see that in that dog. She's 8 years old now. I see that in her now. And dog years, that's close to my age, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I see the same impulses. Now, has she gotten better? Oh my gosh, yeah. We got her a little pup and a friend when she was younger, Sugar, the other dog. But that story is a great parallel because you know how they teach pit bulls to fight often in the city here is they get them a white dog. Well, what do I do to get her as a friend? A white dog, a pure white dog. She's black dog. And those dogs occasionally will fight, and it's horrible.
I can't imagine.
I mean, it's bloody. And Tata used to tear Sugar up. Now, Sugar's a much bigger dog, but Sugar never had the trauma.
Right.
Sugar's just laid back, and she's actually what's called a Dogo Argentina, and she's a fighting dog. Bigger dog, and for years she would tear Sugar's ears up, all these things, and it was impulsive. But once she got through that reaction, guess who's loving on Sugar? Guess who wants to go lay with Sugar? And it's hard for people to understand that was such an imprint on them that it will always be with them. Yeah. It's not an excuse. I don't need you to believe me. I don't need you to empathize. I just need you to listen to me.
And I've said this a million times when it comes to the meltdowns I've had publicly or whatever. It's never an excuse. I can tell you the reasons I did what I did. I can tell you what my thought processes was. I can tell you why my thought processes are the way they are. I can tell you my intention. And I want to tell you those things. I want you to be able to understand, but I never have any expectations that it will excuse any bad behavior,
Well, no, because we always know we're suffering the consequences of it.
Yeah.
And no matter what. And the truth is, if you think about it, there's far more pathological people out there that hide it, who had worse backgrounds and so, but they hide it for lots of reasons. And many of the reasons, because when you do divulge it like you have, and you've been a public figure, but even me and my job, I mean, some of the best universities, when I've told them, especially later on that I was going through this or going through that, they were some of the least understanding and elite institutions. And I would say, I'm really dealing with, some family stuff, some depression or something. And I would admit that to them, thinking, well, they're in the medical sector, they would understand it. And sometimes they were the most judgmental.
I could respect that, actually. Because I can understand that.
It shows a crack in your armor because they have perceived you for so long as this guy who's intellectually, does this. And so it's like putting chum into the water.
Yep.
Because it makes you vulnerable to them to attack. And in your case, you're successful, but when you admit something, it makes you vulnerable to attack.
It's interesting because to look at you, obviously we got some sort of genes in us that made me even slightly attractive at 600 pounds. You're a good looking guy. You're clearly well-spoken. You're clearly intelligent. To look at you, you would never know that you have that poison in you, right? And you refer to it that way. I'm not putting that on you. That's how you describe it, right?
That's exactly, yeah.
I made it very visible. You know how like certain leftist women who hate men get facial tattoos and shave their hair and dye it blue. And it's one of their ways of saying, stay the fuck away from me. This was one of my ways of saying, stay the fuck away from me, right? Like, obviously, as we discussed in the episode, mom fed me wrong on purpose. It was part of the abuse. But eventually I was an adult and I continued to self-destruct because of that poison in me. But it created this shield. And because of that, in professional life, when I was trying to get a job, you remember I moved in with you, I put in 100 job applications. in this area. I tried to work at like a video store stocking video games. How good at that would I be? Talking to customers about video games all day? Hire me at Game Exchange or EB Games or one of these places. I put in applications at all of these places and they all turn me down. And I can't help but think I'm decent in an interview. I just don't look like a person's supposed to look. And I think that's a large part of it. And eventually I did find work, and I did that job for 4 years at the university, even well past when I dropped out of school. It was student work. They kept me on after I was out of school. That's how much they liked me at that job. So, but it's interesting because I think a lot of people do not I think they vastly underestimate me. I know that when I've broken up with women in the past, it was always like, you're breaking up with me, but look at you. And I'm like, hey, look, enough is enough. Like, I can only handle so much shit. And they don't ever expect that. They look at me and they see a doormat. But I think, especially with women, I do not want to be abusive to women. Of course, you remember Danny, my first girlfriend. We often said we worked our crazy out on each other. And I wouldn't really call it abusive, but it certainly wasn't the way a relationship's supposed to be. And so now I know my triggers. I know what can cause me to be a bad person. And so most of the time I'm very much like that. I'm extremely passive in a relationship. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I'm just excited to be there. Let me slide that credit card. I don't care. But when you find one of my boundaries, it's steadfast. And because I know if we go past that boundary, there's a chance I'm going to say things I do not want to say. And I don't ever want to risk that. I don't ever want to risk hurting somebody that I love. So I would rather dump you than to risk it. Does that make sense? But it's always such a surprise because people vastly underestimate me because of it. And I think what you're describing is people discovering it the hard way. Either you're open about it and they're like, I don't know, I thought he was like Superman, because you look like Superman. That's what I'm trying to say. When you are in a work environment, when you're doing what you're doing, you're muscular, you're fit, you're healthy, you're intelligent. They have to be shocked to know that's in you.
They're shocked, but I also have seen it now that I don't put up a front anymore when I've done interviews and stuff. When I got out of academia, I have recruiters and stuff. I do all these interviews and stuff, and I started wondering what the hell's wrong with me, because I never used to even had to apply for a job. I'd have people coming after me right and left, but I realized one of the things I did realize is I'm just honest now. I mean, I don't front my personality. I don't front who I am. And the same thing is true with, any women. I am who I am. And it takes a long time for people like me and you to get to that point.
Yeah. And it especially online.
I'll I mean, the one criticism I gave to you, and you can cut it out of this if you want.
No, probably not.
This is the one thing that bothered me about the documentary, because that's not you.
No, obviously.
But you do get to that at certain times, and I've watched you, and where it appears to be a play for sympathy, and you're not that. You've never really been that, and I understand how it comes across. I understand how it gets to that point, but what makes you, and I think it's one of the reasons that you've had a little, some resurgence on like LOL Cal Live and things like that.
Yeah.
Is when you're your authentic self. And so when you're your authentic self, people can identify with you. It's like the old saying, I have 6 people that can carry my coffin afterwards, but I got 3 motherfuckers that'll drag it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of where you and I have to get to that point. And I don't know if we ever get there, because I don't know if it's ever in our ability to trust somebody that much to be that vulnerable. Because every time when people like you and I are vulnerable, it's used against us.
Yep.
As a weapon.
I have a series of litmus tests that, and this is narcissistic behavior. I'm aware of that. To go back to the documentary real quick, I do have covert narcissistic tools in my toolbox. And that's because our mother would attempt suicide for pity. I remember her getting her stomach pumped several times, not once, several times. Right. And then she'd come into the room. Oh, I just took every pill in the house, Carl. You're going to be so sorry. Right. So you see that that tool ends up in your toolbox. I try very hard not to use it, and it took a really long time for me to learn to get it out of my toolbox, right? So when we were making the documentary, we wanted to take the seeds of truth and blossom them into something more interesting. Because if you really just sat down and interviewed me, it's not that interesting, right? The job interview, which was obviously like a setup bit sketch, you remember that part, that's probably the closest to the real me as I can be, because as you said earlier, I no longer bullshit, right? So on my first dates, I'm like, look, man, I'm morbidly obese. I'm addicted to video games. I spend my money on cardboard, Magic the Gathering cards. Okay. But if you want to go out and eat real good and have very disappointing sex afterwards, I'm your guy. Okay. I'm really gentle. I'm really sensitive. I'm passive. I like to spoil the shit out of persons. That's what you're going to get. But you're going to have to deal with climbing a mountain of gelatinous fat at the end of every meal. Okay. That's just how it is. If you can handle it, let's do it. Right. That's the seed of truth that I was the most proud of. And it's so funny to see people take it so seriously. But this does tie into one of like I said, I have a series of questions from fans that watched the first episode. Number one, are you disappointed that I made my success the way that I did, specifically making myself the butt of the joke throughout my entire career?
No, not at all. I mean, it's quite the opposite. I think when you first, there'd be a tendency to look at that and say, my brother's exploiting the fact that he was fat or whatever. But in fact, you used it as capital. It was the folks that were hating you. So what? They're virtually, it's meaningless. The person love you, okay, but as I said, the things that I'm most proud of, I think that you've had a dramatically positive effect on a portion of the population, and
I hope so.
That I don't think I could do simply by the power of the internet. I think being able to show people that you can do stuff. I mean, I think that's the one thing about the internet being kind of the ultimate democracy. If you're good, or their ultimate capitalism, if you're good, you're going to stay up.
Yeah.
And you did for much longer than a lot of people. So I'm not even remote. In fact, I'm quite proud.
Yeah, 17 years into it, and somebody's still watching this episode. So God bless the 5 of you that are watching it.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, at this point, I mean, it's if you affect one person, if it makes you feel a little bit better in the long run, you know what? Fine. But no way I see. I mean, you compare this to something like the Kardashians, the people, that exploit the media for their own benefit all the time, that had everything given to them, and they still keep taking. And I'm not just trying to pick on one group. I mean, you can't
You're
judge
talking about the
somebody.
majority of celebrities at the end of the day, right? Not all of them give back, for sure.
Yeah, the internet celebrities in general. I mean, it's not about even just giving back. Is that they're not authentic. They're not exposing themselves. It takes somebody really brave to expose themselves. And you did that, and you did it in comedy and stuff like that. But there's a lot of truth in comedy.
Yeah, I grew up watching Evening at the Improv a lot, and then I got into like interviews with a lot of comedians, and I watched a ton of the greats, and the things that I learned so much from Louis C.K. even later. But like early on, especially like George Carlin and stuff, they would talk about comedy has to start with you. If the audience can't laugh at you, then they can't laugh at you, and they can't laugh with you, right? So they have to be able to laugh at you. Most comedians will open by dragging themselves, especially in the 80s, right? And then once you made them disarmed and comfortable around you, then you can go into attacking whoever you want because they're on your side, right? So I learned to try to do that. And Carlin taught you that it's as authentic as it can get. And he ended up telling Louis C.K. later in life that all this bullshit comedy you're doing, it's bullshit. Throw it out. He says, I want you to go home. I want you to write an entire hour-long special, and then I want you to throw it in the fucking trash. Because whatever you write now, Louis, is garbage. And then I want you to write something else. And whatever that is it's going to be more authentic. And if it's not truly authentic, throw that in the trash and get started again. And that's when Louis C.K. was good. And if he kept his wiener in his pants, I think he'd still be really good these days, right? And honestly, I've listened to the things that he's done since then, and it's still funny.
He's genius. But
yeah,
the closest parallel is look at Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor had dramatically, I mean, he grew up in a whorehouse, was abused, sexually molested, everything amazing. I mean, he went through, had a hellacious existence. And
his
he
best
started out,
albums are the ones talking about that, in my opinion.
right. But he started out trying to be like Bill Cosby because he was a mainstream comedian. He was getting a lot of play for that. But it wasn't, there's a documentary that talks about this. It wasn't until he became authentic and started talking about some of this trauma, which you'd imagine was hard to do in the 70s, especially, that he actually got more popular. But
it's something else I'm curious. This spawns from the questions. For the longest time, people knew me as Mr. Rogers of the internet. And then they found out that I had a lot of poison in me, and they found out that I had that edge on me. And they also found out that I was a disgusting pervert. Not like in a bad way, but just like, hey, women are fun, and I love women and adult women, and obviously, but I love women, and women are cool. And I worked in the adult industry for a while because I love women. And I don't know, in your opinion, which is the real me? The more lolcow me, the more where I was trying to be as nice as I could be. I think you like my more offensive sense of humor, but certainly I didn't do that in those days. So what were your thought process of those days when you would see that stuff online?
I mean, I always enjoyed it. I mean, I was always a lot older than you, so it was kind of a different generation.
Yeah.
What you find funny versus, but I always enjoyed it. But what I enjoyed the most, I actually like the characters because the characters always are, to me, that takes a level of creativism that most people don't exist.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, realistically, Francis was just mom, right? And a video game persona.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was playing early video games like Super Mario Brothers and stuff like that, or like Tecmo Bowl against you when you came home from school, that was me. I would get actually angry playing video games. So it's kind of easy. The other characters that were never near as successful, the voices and stuff like that. I mean, you're the one who got me doing voices. I don't know if you know that, but even when I was like really little, at some point you came home from school and you told me that they didn't take you serious because of your accent,
right.
And that if I wanted to be an actor and if I wanted to be successful, I'd have to learn to speak like normal people. And if I remember correctly, you even told me to like pay attention to the way they talk on television, like the news.
Yeah, like
newscasters. So I started doing that, and that's the voice I'm using right now. This isn't my most authentic voice. My most authentic voice still has Southern drawl in it.
It's
and when I go back,
it's called code switching.
it's
a phenomenon that happens often with inner city blacks who are successful and things like that.
If you
out of your slang and dialect,
if you end up in Southwest Virginia, Kentucky, in that area, and I know you haven't in a while, but when you did go back, did you find yourself immediately going into like fully switching back into Southern drawl? Like at some point we were at Wood Boogers up there in Wise, Virginia, and I'm like, and she's like, y'all want mozzarella sticks with that? They're on the house. And I'm like, oh, that's real nice of you, sweetheart. Yeah, I'll have some, And why? How? Why? It's so weird. I feel like that is my more authentic self, and I've just been hiding it. I feel like if I moved back home, I'd feel more comfortable just being a redneck on my front yard, shirtless.
It's just natural. I do it here. It depends on what crowd I'm in.
I do it when I'm my most dissociative. So the way that my PTSD seems to function is when I have something that triggers like generational trauma, stuff that we went through as kids. I will hit the eject button mentally, and I often just get very quiet. I'll just kind of sit there. I won't do much of anything. And if I'm pushed, I'll raise my voice. Leave me the hell alone, right? That's me. But if I'm forced to have a conversation in that state, it'll have a Southern dialect sometimes.
Right.
And it's so shocking to people. They're like, why are you faking an accent? I'm like, I promise you I ain't. What the hell? Like, so I don't know. It's hard to make sense of that, but I don't know. Part of that's something else I've always wondered. Do you regret having been born in that part of the country and living that way?
Not at all.
Not
no.
at all. I used to.
When I was young, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I was
Exactly.
because you're thrust into an environment you're not ready for when you go. But there's so much about that was also positive
Oh yeah.
that you can't. I mean, I I can't even remotely think about what I would be without that. And it's also a part of America that hardly doesn't exist anymore.
Nope. No. It
Um,
does. I'll tell you, it does still in St. Paul, and it's kind of insane. We went back there and I stayed overnight. And you know where we stayed? You know the Baptist church that was not too far from the house mom was trying to buy not too far from the school? Across the street from that used to be a funeral home. That's been remodeled as an Airbnb.
yeah, no,
And
yeah,
so we stayed in that funeral home.
yeah.
And it was creepy as shit. I'm not gonna lie, but it was beautiful. It was real nice. And we got to see the town and walk through it. And we saw kids on their bikes just playing outside. And I'm like, cannot tell you the last time I saw a group of 5 kids biking around. I live in a safe suburban Arkansas neighborhood and I don't
Yeah,
see it.
but it's still not the same because
Yeah,
number
yeah.
one, there's no high school there anymore.
Oh yeah, that's true.
There's not the same identity. You know, there was never any fast food chains or anything. A Pizza Hut was the only thing we had, and it wasn't even in our town.
No, yeah.
Um, they were isolated, but in a good way too. I mean, it was bad and good. But I would argue there's more good than bad.
I think so.
I think there's a lot of good things that they've done since then. Preserving some of the history and you know, utilizing the natural environment like the river.
Oh, and
But
the bike trails too, they're
yeah,
beautiful.
but stuff like that. But I
Anyway.
don't regret it at all because in fact I think it's quite. I even I mean, there's a part of me that says it wouldn't be it'd be bad to live in there in my later years because
No, I'd
uh,
like to retire there, or at least like maybe I don't know outside of Gatlinburg, something like that. But I would kill to live in those mountains. Me and Desi have talked about it quite a lot. Eventually the time will come that I'll sell this house. I can't really keep it up anymore and stuff like that. And when we do, I think Southwest Virginia would be a beautiful place to live. And
it's
of
just
course, I still have that plot of land there too. We could put a cabin on that if we wanted to.
yeah, I did. My biggest thing is it's too damn cold. Everything
Yeah,
else I wouldn't care about, but
yeah, those winters were miserable. Yeah,
but I remember going back it's been about 5 or 6 years ago when my friend Rob died, and um, it just felt a peace when I was there.
yeah, me
Um,
too. It feels like
being
home
there,
now. It didn't
it
feel like
feels
home in the last 10 years that I left, but it feels like home now. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of
Um,
it is what we were experiencing in that area, less than the area itself. I have an interesting story. I won't out the teacher here, but I talked to one of our teachers on Facebook and asked her, "Did you know what was going on in her home?
mhm,
And if you did, why didn't you do anything?" And this person taught you as well.
mhm,
And she read it and waited like a month to respond, but I finally got a response. And a response was, "Yeah, I knew. We all did. That's why we sent you to Upward Bound to get away from that place for a while. That's why I taught you to read so you could escape into books. That's why I got you into after school activities. That's why I did everything I could, but there was only so much we could do." And I used to hate that answer, especially when I first got it. But then I realized we're a product of Southwest Virginia. People were more hands off, especially in the late 70s, early 80s. They
mhm,
did what they could do, right? That
mhm.
fit social confines. And look, if I came to school with my face cut up or someone nearly died, I'm sure they would have done more, right? But it was like it was a survivable level of abuse. And I don't think they could really truly understand what we were going through either. So
Yeah, it was different in my situation because I would have done everything to hide it. Um,
I did
the
too. Yeah,
the
yeah. Yeah.
the thought of them knowing anything would have been poor, and in fact, I wanted to think just the opposite. And I didn't want them to, but again, like as I've said many times, your situation was more dire than mine.
Right. Right. I only ever
And
spoke to them about it like once, and then I immediately recanted it because it got back to mom. You know.
yeah, there's stuff like that I was like, I don't want. And mine was different. They actually in some ways would use it against me.
Oh, that sucks.
To keep me out of certain things. But that's the small town kind of that could have happened anywhere, and I'm not even resentful of that, because I think of there's a lot of things I think about, a lot of the good things that happen.
Yeah, me too.
And so I don't have any resentment whatsoever.
That leads me into another question. Let's a little more upbeat. They want to know, what was a favorite memory together as kids? I can think of a few. We had a few good ones. One is a little less wholesome, but I'm curious what you come up with. I've already thought this through, so I'll give you my answer and then you can come up with yours.
Okay.
But one day we both got home after school and I wanted to watch Dukes of Hazzard and you wanted to watch Happy Days. And so we got into a very brotherly wrestling match over the knob of that shitty television. No remote control, right? We're broke. And the knob would come off of this old television. And so you really couldn't turn it anymore without a pair of pliers. Could turn the knob to change the channel. I grabbed that knob and flung it out the front door once it was on Dukes of Hazzard. And you tackled me to the ground to try to get it. And looking back on that, it also reminds me of us listening to Queen in Mom's bedroom, just like goofing off, playing. You lean the mattress against the wall. I think you had me doing like a bowl thing, running towards a blanket and hitting the mattress and falling down on my ass and laughing. And I mean, that should really tell you the age difference between us, because I was 4 and you're certainly a teenager at that point. But I mean, I have almost exclusively good memories with you. I don't have a bad one. I racking my brain right now. I can't think of a bad one.
Yeah, one of the memories I have is I had gone to Myrtle Beach with Daddy Carl one time, and we always brought back like something for gifts or something. And I got you a Ernie puppet.
Oh,
and
that was you. That was you. Oh my God, I didn't set that thing down. And also, I found out that I'm on the autism spectrum. I chewed on that thing's ears constantly as some sort of stimulation and didn't know why, but I had that thing on my hand, and if I wasn't, I was sucking the ears off of it for some reason. That was you. That's amazing.
And I have a couple. Another memory I have is one time we were over in Castlewood, and they were giving you a hard time about someone's making fun of you or something. And you were playing baseball, and you just knocked the hell out of the ball.
Yeah.
You got, I don't know if it was like, I don't think they did T-ball back then, but I think it was regular. But you just knocked the hell out of the ball and like got on base. And I just remember being proud because they were giving you such a hard damn time.
Yeah, well, I was blind as shit. If you remember, I was probably wearing that stupid eye patch they were putting on me.
No, you were, but you're in the mellow yellow shirt. There's a picture.
Oh yeah, with the mellow yellow team. I love that.
They had because it was the Coke. So there'd be the mellow yellow team, the Sprite team, the Coke team.
Yeah, our athletic team was brought to you by the sweet, delicious, sugary taste of Mellow Yellow. That's insane. But no, that was the cool part about sports is I couldn't hit the ball to save my life, but if I did, it was gone because I knew how to put my weight behind it, even as a kid. I think you taught me that. It certainly wasn't Dad or Daddy Carlos. It had to be you.
I just remember it was funny, but those are a couple ones I remember. But I'm trying. I mean, I remember the day you were born like it was yesterday.
It's my understanding. Didn't you and Dad name me against Mom's?
No, I named you.
You named me. Okay, that's what I thought.
And I named you. I don't know why. Between that and Craig, for some damn reason.
Thank you for not naming me Craig. That's not a name I would. I don't feel like a Craig. I feel more like a Boogie than a Craig, honestly. Well, so Steven, so Jason is dad's name, right?
That's his middle name. His dad's name was no, I'm sorry. That was his dad's name. It's a great grandfather. Right.
And then because Dad had no middle name, by the way, for the records. They'll use that to hack my accounts probably. But where the hell did Steven come from?
I have no idea.
It's a good one. How mad was Mom? If I remember correctly,
she was mad. I mean, she let us. I mean, No, it wasn't. As I recall, there's no struggle over it. But I was what. I mean, I don't know why she let us pick it out, but or let me pick it
Yeah.
out. But
Sometimes I wish I was just Steve to the internet. But you know, a lot of people that go through childhood abuse or abuse when they're young, they tend to pick a new identity and sometimes an official name change to go with it. I just went with the nickname. But I have friends and that I met in support groups and through other things where they just completely altered their name from their original name, just got entirely rid of their first, middle, and last name and came up with something completely new because they just didn't want to associate with that kid. So I think that's kind of what I did. But I don't know. My roommates call me Steve interchangeably with Boogie now. And I don't know. I think I like it. You've always called me Steve, obviously. So I like that a lot. Yeah, it's a good name. Thank you for doing that. So somebody wanted to know if you ever found yourself jealous of my success as if I did not deserve it.
not even
And then,
close. In fact, it was just the opposite. I
yeah,
felt
I've
like you
always
deserved
felt
it
it.
more.
Yeah, even when we were down in the trenches and I was looking up at you, I was like, man, I'm glad he got the hell out. And then, you know, I realized that you can take the abusive childhood, you can get the man out of the abusive childhood, but you can't always get it out of the man. So then I kind of felt bad about it. But I've always rooted you on from even when I was applying for disability because I couldn't work anymore. I was rooting you on. Yeah, I couldn't imagine not rooting you on. Somebody wanted to know what your oh shit moment was, like realizing that I'd become internet famous. Like, when did you know? No.
Probably my kids. Well, my kids knew.
Yeah.
They knew it got back to them, and
Yeah.
so because they. I don't think it's. I mean, it'd be harder for me to grasp. Just the sheer numbers don't mean as much, but you know, if kids in my school know that their uncle, you know, then they would know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. We got some nasty questions in here, stuff that I don't think is appropriate for YouTube, but we could talk about it maybe on a live stream at one point. You know, like they're talking about some of the gnarlier parts of the abuse that you and I experienced and stuff. And I don't know. I don't feel like that's what I'm going for here, but you do have such tremendous feedback here. There's so much of the positivity. Here might be a good one to end it on. Um, and I answer this question a lot in my own brain and my own personal life. Do you specifically hate or love mom at this stage of your life?
Neither really. Um, that's a weird question.
It's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah, because I definitely don't hate her.
Right. I did go through periods of time where I absolutely did, for sure. Right. Especially after
Um,
she died. And there was like, I could finally let myself do that. So I did for a while, but certainly not now.
I have sympathy for her,
Yes.
but it's hard to say that I love her because, and the reason I say that is that I know, for me at least, the only pure love that I've ever had is my children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you know what that feels like, you know that's not what I felt by her. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and you know that unconditional love that you have for your children, you should have for your mom too, or your parents. I don't know if I love my dad. I mean, I know him enough. I
Yeah.
love my grandfather. I loved him deeply.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I, I I have kind of indifference towards her. Um, I don't have resentment. I don't have. I mean, especially I think it's different too because you weren't a parent,
Right. Oh, trust
and
me,
so
it's one of my biggest regrets, I think, and later in life, you know.
well, not necessarily. I mean, I it's not for me to judge one way or the other, but the thing is, once you're a parent and you realize the difficulty of not bringing your own shit into your parenting,
You're right,
and
which is what I was
you
always
see the
afraid of,
mistakes
you
that
know.
you have, and so I would argue it's a more heroic choice not to be a parent than to be one. And I didn't do it for selfish reasons, but by the same token, I you develop more of a sense of empathy for somebody once you've gone through that.
I think you and I have talked a great many times about your kids, and I doubt they'll see this, but if they ever did, I hope you guys know I love you. I'm sorry I'm so distant, but I'm distant with everybody. It's just who I am. Come look at my phone sometime and you'll see a million unread texts and 3 red ones, because that's who I am. I don't know why. But we've talked about your kids a great amount. And I've often told you, when you're beating yourself up because you felt like you brought some of that stuff to the table when you tried so hard not to, I've always told you, did you do better than mom and dad? Certainly you did.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. That's all we can do as a species, right? Just do better than our parents did. Don't take a step back. And if you can, and you did so vastly better. It's ridiculous how much better. And like you said, if you weren't there, you can't really truly know it. But God damn, I know every dirty secret that there is, and there isn't any. And your kids, at the end of the day, God bless them, they're so much healthier than you or I, in my opinion, by quite a bit, because they didn't experience that poison. And Brian, I'm just so goddamned proud of you. And I always will be. And I don't know, man, I'm really lucky to have you as my brother. And to go back to answer the question, I don't know if they wanted my answer or not, but I genuinely thought I loved mom growing up because I was manipulated into it. But then once I was removed from it, I realized that I loved the idea of having a mother, and I just never had one. Right. I had at some point a woman who tried to be my friend, a woman who tried to be my controller, one woman who tried to be my abuser, a woman who wanted me to be her caretaker, but never a parental role. And the more I understood what a parent was supposed to be, I realized that wasn't her. So I'll always be grateful for, hey, there's food on the table. The lights were on most of the time. There was almost always running water. And, you know, we had some cool experiences. And obviously, she brought me into this world. And I'm always going to be grateful for that. In a very Southern way, I love my mama for being that person. But I don't know who the hell she was. I don't think she knew who she was, you know?
No. And we'll never know the full gravity of it. But I mean, she did a lot of good things too. I mean, it's easy to sit here and talk about all the bad stuff. I mean, she did a lot of good stuff. But, you know, I kind of look at it on the whole, and as a whole, she did more detriment than good. And I'm not blaming her. It's not it's an observation. And
see, I often think about, you know, remember my first girlfriend, Danny, she got her out of living in a car. And she did that for so many kids. It's so interesting that she would abuse and neglect us, and that she would go above and beyond, especially later in her Head Start career, to be a child advocate, to go to court for these children, to get a hold of Child Protective Services, to do everything she could to feed and take care of and protect these kids. And there was a period of time I thought certainly it had to be a net gain, because there are, let's say, 20 kids a year for 25 years, comes out to 500 kids out there who probably remember her as Miss Wanda and remember her as being a pretty good teacher. We know her as a shitty mom, though. And so I don't know. Sometimes I want to believe it was a net good, but then I know the poison she put into the world outside of her career, outside of our home as well. And there was so much of it, you know?
I mean, yeah, I just, like I said, if I had to describe one feeling I have, is it's more empathy than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. 110%. She was a product of her environment and a product of her mental health, and God bless her. But to say that, I think the only family member I have the closest thing to true, genuine admiration and love for, that'd be your dumbass. You know, I love Carla and I loved what I knew of dad, and I loved parts of mom, but you've never done me wrong. You've always been generous and kind. You've been funny and interesting and wonderful. And even at your darkest moments, you're a gentle, kind soul. You've done everything that a brother is supposed to do. And I genuinely like you as a person. It kind of sucks that you're my favorite, but I'd say
we don't have a lot to choose from either.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. But I do love you, brother, and I can't believe
I
you
love you
taking the
too.
time to come on here and do this on both the podcast and my channel. We got to plug some shit. I'll put this down below, by the way. Plug some stuff for me. Tell me what you want people to go see, go read.
Well, I'm
go look
gonna.
at.
I posted up on Twitter my book that's coming out, and at some point I want to talk, or that will be coming out. I've still got a lot of writing to do, but I want to talk to you a little bit about that
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
ties into what we're talking about.
When it is coming
Um,
out, I'm gonna bring your ass back and we'll push it then too.
okay, I
All
appreciate
right.
it.
All right.
All right,
Brother, I love you so much. You have a wonderful day. And to the guys listening, as always, thanks for watching. We love you very much, and we will speak with you again soon.
all right, bye bye.